Okay, so let's learn about Git a little bit. Before I actually create a repository, before I do anything with Git, I just want to show you where we're starting, that we've just got really nothing, basically. So this is my day one demo folder. Just the hello world files, the dummy text file, notes file. We don't actually need all these. I'm going to get rid of some of these guys. Cool. So just these files here that I've been working with today. I did an ls-a again. We saw there's nothing else hidden, no tricks. So now I'm going to ask Git a question. Ask it, what is the status of what you're doing right now? Because Git is a command line utility, so everything that it does is pretty much invisible. It's not going to really tell you much unless you ask it. So we're going to ask it, what's the status? Currently, this is not a Git repository. This folder that I'm in right now, it's just a regular folder. It's not something that Git knows about, that Git is expecting to track. So it just says, can't do anything because this is not a Git repository. In order to create a Git repository, the first thing that we're going to have to do is git init. This will initialize our Git repository. It's giving me some warnings. I don't really care. I'm going to worry about that later. Okay, so now if I ls, I don't see anything new. However, if we dig a little bit deeper, I do ls-a, now I can see something new here. After I ran git init, it creates this folder called .git. So this .git folder is created when I run git init. And everything that makes this folder a Git repository is stored inside of this .git folder. So I can ls that folder, just the same way you can do ls on any folder and list the contents of it. And so this is what's inside of the .git folder. You're not going to have to worry about much of this for this cohort, for this program. Later on, as we get into some of the more advanced Git stuff, we might talk about some of these files or folders inside of here. But for now, the important part that I want to impress upon you is just, you should make sure that this folder exists, because if it does not exist, then this is not a Git repository. So to double check this, I can type git status, and this is going to tell me I have untracked files. So there are files in this folder, but Git doesn't know about them. Now, just to kind of demonstrate what I was talking about before. So you see here, if I type git status, Git tells me what it knows about this repo. But now, if I delete this .git folder, then that's going to make this no longer a Git repo. So I'm just going to use rm-rf in order to delete this folder. Actually, just for funsies, I'm going to do rm-r, just so you can see what this looks like. I definitely thought I was going to get asked for confirmation for that. So I guess I didn't actually need the -f flag there. So never mind that. So rm-r deletes the .git folder. Now if I run git status, we get that fatal message before. Git doesn't know what I'm talking about because this is no longer a Git repository. So now that we understand that, let's reinitialize our Git repo. Git init. So now at this point, I might create files or do some work, add to those files, but I've already got some files here that have been created. The main.js, main.py, notes.md. Yeah, so let's ask Git what the next step is. How do we move forward from here? So now what I really want to do is I want to create a commit. A commit is like a snapshot in time of this project so that you can go back to it later. So basically every time that you do anything good and your project is working, like it's not a buggy mess at that moment, or maybe whenever you're done working for the day, you should commit. Ideally, we want to create a commit, every few hours, a few times a day or something. But currently we don't have any. What Git is telling me now is that we have these untracked files, and it wants me to use git add to specify what will be committed. So that's an important distinction here, is that I'm not going to just go ahead and commit these files right away, but I need to first include it in that commit. I need to tell Git what we're about to commit. It's this kind of multi-step process here. So I'm just going to do what Git is telling me. I'm going to say git add and then the file to be included. Now I could name them one by one, git add main.js, git add main.py, but most commonly, you're going to want to commit every file in your project at once, just to make sure that everything is kept together in compatible versions. So who can take a guess at what command I might use if I wanted to add this entire folder?
Dot.
Say it again.
Period.
Yeah. So git add dot is going to add all the files in this current folder. So now if I do git status, it's going to show me I still have no commits, but now I have changes to be committed. Because I added these 3 files to my staging area is what it's called. I have staged these files to be committed, and I can unstage them if I want, but that's not what I'm going to do. Now I can commit them. It's kind of funny that Git gives you a hint on how to undo this, but not how to go forward. So I'm just going to show you that. In order to actually commit these files, I use git commit, and then don't press enter. Before you forget, -m is for message. This is a description of what you did. Usually a sentence or so. You can make them more descriptive, but I don't always. And then I'll hit enter. So it tells me here 3 files were changed, 41 insertions, mostly from the notes file. And I made that commit on the master branch. Every repo has multiple branches. They're kind of different versions of the project, but by default, you only start with one branch. That's the master branch for the main version of the project. And for most of this bootcamp, you're probably not going to be using many branches because you're just going to be working by yourself on personal projects. But when we get to the bigger personal projects later, and especially with the group projects, using branches is going to be much more important. Sorry, I saw a hand go up just now. Didn't catch whose it was.
Yes, it's me. I was wondering what the purpose of the staging area is. Like, why wouldn't you want to just add your files like directly or commit them, I guess, to the repo?
So part of it is to give you an opportunity to be more specific about what you're going to commit. You can add a whole bunch of files and then do git status to see which files are added. And then maybe you want to remove 1 or 2 of them or add in 1 or 2 more. I don't do that. Like I said, I usually just add or remove all of them at once, but some people like to have that more nuanced control. And so that's why git add and git commit are broken up into 2 steps like that. I like to think of it as kind of like using a photocopier. This is a metaphor that I think is a neat way to understand Git. That, like, imagine your repo is like a stack of papers that you want to copy. Your project is a stack of papers that you want to copy. And then a commit is the photocopy of your papers, of your project. but you can't just directly create a photocopy. You have to first load it into the copier. So the staging area in Git is kind of like putting things face down in the copier. That's you saying like, these are the things that are about to be copied. And then when you press the copy button on the copier, that's actually like typing git commit, which takes everything that's been loaded into the copier and then makes a copy of it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
So truth be told, it's actually not a perfect metaphor because your individual git commits are not full copies of the repo. They only describe the changes from one commit to the previous one. So that's how your Git repositories can be relatively small because it's not actually multiple copies of your project. But I still think that the photocopier metaphor is a useful way to think about how Git works, or at least for understanding why we have the staging area as this extra step. So I hope that's not confusing. Feel free to ask questions about that in the future. This is definitely one of those parts of Git that people find kind of weird. We had some other hands up.
Yes, just for me to understand, like, as an overview of what we're talking about here, what is Git even needed for? Like, why do we need Git at all? What's the whole purpose of it in general? Like,
that's a good question. Maybe I should have started there. So Git is a command line tool that we will use for tracking different versions of our project. So as you're just working independently on your projects, you're going to use Git to basically save your work, essentially. Every time you make changes that you wouldn't want to be lost, you're going to create a commit in Git, which is basically a snapshot of your work at that point in time. So you can go back to that point in time if you ever need to. Like if your project breaks and you need to go back to when it used to work, you can go back to a previous Git commit. Git is also the tool that we're going to use for collaborating with other people, because it will allow all of us to work on a version of the project on our own machine and then merge in our versions together using Git. And it's going to figure out what's the correct version that's the most up to date for everyone to be working off of. So Git only exists on the command line on your local machine.
So is it kind of like a Google Docs for code?
Yes, it is. I guess I would say like Git plus GitHub together is kind of like Google Docs, because Git only exists on the command line on one computer. So you're going to need to use GitHub to connect it with other people to make it like collaborative. So again, to be clear, Git is a command line program for tracking changes to a project. It just runs in my terminal here on my local machine. GitHub.com is a website that hosts Git repositories. And we're going to use GitHub.com in order to share Git repositories with each other, for example, like on the group project. And yeah, that's going to prevent us from like stepping on each other's toes and duplicating effort and stuff like that, making sure that we're all working on the right version of the project. I saw some other hands up.
Yes, I have a question. My command to unstage the files is different than your command. I assume that's because I'm using the Z shell and you're using bash. Is that going to cause any issues? And am I correct about that?
Whether you're using Z shell or bash, that shouldn't make a difference in this regard. What command is it telling you to type?
It says git restore staged file. Is it a different version or something?
Possibly. So let's see. So my Git is version 2.32. What version of Git are you using?
Yeah, 2.32. .1.1.
Oh, so you're slightly newer than I am, I guess.
Oh yeah, this is Apple Git 133. That might be it.
So yeah, I'm sure that both of those commands would work for both of us, but it seems like Git is kind of updating their recommendations for how people solve problems. Sorry, say again, what command did it suggest you use?
It says git restore staged instead of rm cached.
Okay, yeah. I think generally speaking, like in more recent times, Git is trying to suggest people use commands that sound like what they do. Like git rm, it's a 2-letter command. Like if you're not already familiar with it, it's not really clear what it does. And it sounds kind of dangerous because it's rm, it removes things. But unstaging something is not actually that dangerous. So git restore, I think, sounds a lot better. It sounds more like what you're actually doing. So it makes sense that they would update that recommendation to use that command instead. But they're probably both equivalent to each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yes. And just another like more overreaching idea about this is depending on the ID, why do we even need to use Git or GitHub at all? Doesn't it like automatically save, or do we have to use Git on our exact system, or can we just upload like our code to GitHub to share with other people? Because using the command line, wouldn't that be separate than just using like what we were kind of doing before, or like our practice stuff of like writing a piece of code and then just saving it as its own file?
So it's not just about like saving your work automatically, because you don't just want to have the most recent version of it saved. You want to have a whole bunch of past versions of it saved also. Because like, let's say you're just, saving your work normally with Command S or Control S or something, and then your project breaks and last Tuesday was working correctly. Git can take you back to how your project looked last Tuesday. Whereas like, I don't know how to do that with just a regular Microsoft Word document. Maybe Microsoft Word has some kind of change tracking thing in it. But this way, like the change tracking is independent of any IDE, and you can track changes to any text-based project. Git is also really good at telling you what has changed. So
But it
if
has
you
to
plan on-
run through the command line, right? That's the only way, is it has to be run through the command line with Git. There's no other way around it.
It doesn't have to be run at the command line. You can find graphical programs that let you do these Git commands. I would like to discourage you from using them. In my opinion, the best way to really have like a deep understanding of how Git works, and in order to be able to use it flexibly, you need to learn how Git works at the command line. Because if you learn Git with a graphical interface, like you'll be able to accomplish everything you need to accomplish for the most part, but it's going to be a lot of clicking. It's just very slow and laborious. Whereas if you get good at using Git at the command line, then anything you do with Git, you can put in a script and do it automatically, or you can do it like 1,000 times in a row or whatever. Just being able to do anything or everything at the command line is much more powerful and much more flexible. So as developers, we should try to learn to do as many things at the command line as possible so that all of our different skills can like complement each other more.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? These are definitely all like really great questions. Your questions are probably more important than like the actual prepared material I have for you on Git. So please do ask them if you've got something in your head. All right, but if not, I'll continue. Okay, so the most recent thing I did here was git commit, said I did work. Now if I do git status, okay, so it's telling me that the notes were modified because I just typed some notes after committing. So I'm going to git add again, commit notes. So now I'm going to git status. And it tells me that I'm on branch master because that's the default branch and I haven't changed it. And there's nothing to commit and the working tree is clean. So working tree clean basically just means that I don't have any uncommitted changes. I haven't added any files or edited any files since the last time I committed. Right. And so like I was saying before, if you run git commit, but you forget the -m message, like Git's not going to let you get away without writing that message. It's going to open up Vim and say, write your message here now. So let me just show you that real quick. So I did git status, and I've got these unstaged, I've got changed files, changes that are not staged for commit. So I'm going to git add dot, git commit. So this is a common mistake people make. I'm going to type git commit and just hit enter without a message. Git does not like that. You need a message for your commits. So it has opened up Vim and is like, write a message. So I'll say, this is my, wait, that's not right. Go into insert mode. This is my commit message. Great. And then :WQ to save this commit message. And then it takes me back to my command line as normal. But honestly, I would have preferred not to do that. It would be better if I just typed the message right here. So that's preferable. All right, so if I've been doing a bunch of work and I want to kind of like recollect on what I've been doing, just retrospect, look back, we have git log, which is going to show you all of the previous commits before your current one. So here's my most recent commit. It's got an ID 7369, et cetera, FB4. This is also the master branch, the tip of the master branch. And this is my commit message for that. This is my commit message. And then, previously I added notes, and then originally I did work. So that can be nice if you're coming back to a project after a long weekend and you're just kind of forgetting what you've been doing recently. You can check the log and it'll show you what you've been up to recently. Okay, but so everything that I've shown you so far is only working with Git on my local machine. So we're definitely going to want to use Git with GitHub so we can copy repositories back and forth between Code Platoon's GitHub account and your GitHub account and your local machine. So kind of 3 different locations that you're going to have to be aware of. So first, I'm going to show you how I would back up this repository onto my GitHub account. This day 1 folder. So let's see here. So since I've committed everything, there's no untracked changes. I'm going to go over to GitHub over here. And you'll see this little plus button up in the top right. I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to select an owner. This is going to go into my personal account. So I belong to a few organizations. So this is the organization that you're going to be looking at for your homework and everything. But right now, I'm just going to save this in my personal organization. Git demo. This is not the first time I've done this, so I'm going to have to come up with a different name for it. We had a hand up just now.
Oh, that was my bad. I was just trying to figure out.
Oh, cool. So I'll come up with a name, does not need a description. I'm gonna just make it public. I'm gonna skip all these other options. And I will just create an empty repository. So now I've created an empty repo. There's nothing in it, but Git is prepared for me to put things in here. Now, if you've never done this before, they give you some kind of tips on how to get started, but I know what I'm doing. So I'm going to just copy this URL over here. This is the remote URL for this repository. Now, a remote in Git is kind of like a remote island. You know, it just means it's far away. It's somewhere else. It's not the local repository that's on my machine right in front of me. It's the repository that's somewhere else on someone else's servers. This is on GitHub servers, wherever they store that. So anyway, I've copied this URL here, you know, github.com, Raphael Platoon, another git demo.git. Then I go to my command line, and I'm going to add a remote. So first I type git remote, shows me nothing because I don't have any remote repositories set up. Excuse me. So I want to add a remote. I'm going to use the command git remote add. And then I need to specify a name for this remote. So how am I going to refer to this other repository, which is intended to be a copy of this local repository? It's basically just like a secure place where I can back up my code or maybe share it with other people, but I need a name for this location. So you can call it anything you want, but it is very customary that the first remote for every repository is called origin. This is like extremely customary. I think anybody would be shocked and dismayed if you created a Git repository and the first remote was not called origin. So Git isn't going to force you to do this, but I will. Git remote add origin, and then the URL. You just paste that right in there. Hit enter. Git didn't complain. No news is good news. So I'm going to trust that it worked. So all this is really doing here is I've created essentially an alias saying that I need to work with this remote URL, but I don't want to type that whole thing in every time I'm syncing up with that remote URL. So I'm just going to refer to it as origin. I've created this short little alias to help me more easily refer to this remote repository. So now that I've added this remote, I just want to confirm what I did. I'm going to type git remote again, and it shows me I have one remote. It's origin. If I want more information, git remote -v actually tells me the URL. So sometimes, you're going to mistype the URL, and then you're not going to be able to push or pull or update your Git repository. This is maybe the first step that you would try to debug that. Just ask yourself, is the going to the URL I think it's going to? So git remote -v will show you that. But if I think this is the correct remote, then I can push my changes. So given that there's nothing to commit, working tree is clean, I will git push origin. So that's where I'm pushing it. And then I need to say what I'm pushing the master branch. So now it's telling me to create a new branch, created a master branch on GitHub based on my master branch from my local repository. Looks like everything was successful. So now when I go over to GitHub and refresh the page, now, instead of giving me that, first time setup tips, it's showing me the files that I had locally, showing me the commit messages for when I updated these files last, the timestamps on them, and look at them individually. And so that's how I get my local work up to GitHub. Now, it also goes in the reverse direction that I need to get changes from GitHub to my local machine. So I'm just going to simulate a collaborator here. So I'm going to go into this main.py file and I'm just going to edit it right on github.com. Going to add an exclamation mark in there. Commit the changes. Now, normally we don't do this. Normally we do not make changes to our Git repositories directly on GitHub. They let you do that, but typically you do it from your editor locally on your machine and then push the changes up. I just wanted to simulate real quick changes to the repository that are in GitHub, but not on my local machine. So now, since there's changes that are on GitHub, but I don't have them locally, I want to get those changes here. Does anyone have a hunch how I do that?
Git pull.
Yeah, so I don't know if you just knew that or if you're guessing, but it's a good guess. If you
I knew
were,
it.
huh?
Oh, I knew it.
Okay. Well, I would like to believe that some of you could have guessed it anyway, because if push is how we take our local code and put that onto GitHub, then logically pull would be the opposite of that. That's how we take code from GitHub and apply it to our local repository. I'm going to run the same command, just with pull instead of push. And so that's telling me I was able to update it. It changed the main.py file. It added and deleted one line is how it describes it, because I just made a change on one line. But now if I look at that Python file in my main.py, you can see that the changes taken effect, that I added in that exclamation mark when there was not one here before. I saw a couple hands go up. Who has questions?
So I had a question. My first question was, I had two questions actually. So my first one was, if it's always named origin, then if you have multiple projects, how do you know like which files are going to which repository?
So each project will be its own Git repository, and each Git repository will have its own remote called origin.
Okay.
And so Git knows, because you're inside of that folder, that you're running commands on that repository specifically.
Okay. Okay, so that remote thing, you would do that at the start of any project, and it would basically say all the files in this folder, I want to go to this repository.
Yeah, that's how you kind of set up the link between your local project, your local Git repository on your machine, and a Git repository in github.com where you would back it up or share it with collaborators.
Okay. And then my next question is, I was following along with you.
Yep.
And I just used a folder that had some Python files in it. And when we did the install fest, can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was like GCM or something. Basically, the way I would, it's like the authorization thing that would basically how I would put my password in, so I don't have to log in every time I push and pull, right? And you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Git credential manager.
Yes, that's it. So when I signed up for that, it did tell me that I would have to basically authorize it the first time I tried to push something. So when I just tried to push it, it's giving me a bunch of information here that I don't quite know what to do with, because I went online and I did authorize it, but now when I'm in trying to find my files, they're not there.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Git has kind of recently updated some of their security policies. So
oh, so actually I just found it. It looks like I somehow, my main branch was called main, not master. So it looks like I accidentally made a new branch called master when I followed along with you. Is that
okay. So that's another relatively recent change with Git, is that the default branch, they're in the process of renaming it from master to main to be a little bit more politically correct. So you might actually see that used kind of inconsistently here. Some of our older repos, the default branch is still going to be called master. And I guess because I installed Git a little while ago, the repos that I create on my local machine, their default branch is also master. But for a lot of the newer repos that we create, like especially ones that were created on github.com, they're going to have a default branch of main. So you can think of those as being kind of equivalent, main or master. Just main is the newer convention.
Okay, so is it okay that I have these two branches, or should I try to go back up to the instructions and change it to main?
I mean, it doesn't really matter that you've got two branches. You can just kind of pick one that you're going to use and ignore the other, or you can delete the other.
Okay. All right, that was all I had. Thanks.
You're welcome. Justin?
Hey, I'm curious, if you have a repository that you've uploaded to GitHub that has, let's say it just has 5 files in it, right?
Okay.
And that's the current status of your project. GitHub repository reflects those 5 files. And as you're working, you decide you don't need one of those files and you remove it, and it's no longer relevant to your project. And then you commit 4 instead of 5 files. When it updates the GitHub, is it updating those 4 out of 5, or is it removing that 5th? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question, actually. So actually, I think I can just show you. So here's our another Git demo. We've got main.js, main.py, notes.md. I'm going to rm main.py. Git status tells me that I deleted main.py. I'm going to again git add dot. Status says I've changed to be committed. Git commit -m deleted main.py master, and it's gone.
Okay. But in a previous version, that file exists?
Correct. So that's why I say that that's an interesting question, because Git was fairly recently updated to behave this way. It used to be that git add dot would not notice deleted files. And there was a different command, git add -A, that I had to teach people just for the purpose of getting Git to notice deleted files. Thankfully, Git no longer works this way. They made it just a little bit smarter, a little bit more convenient. And so now git add dot is a much more useful command that's going to probably work in all cases for you. But yeah, if you were taking this course like a year ago, I would have taught you git add -A instead.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. What other questions do we have?
My question, it's a little bit, it's kind of about Git Bash, but so if I'm in my Visual Studio Code, I can run honestly, most commands like make directory, blah, 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 stuff like that. All the Git ones work. But for whatever reason, touch doesn't work at all. And if I want to use the command to use touch, I actually have to go into a folder, right click on it, and then say Git Bash here. And then it works. Is that just maybe a Windows problem, or do you know what would be causing that?
Yeah, so you're on Windows. So the deal is that you do have Git installed on your machine, but you're not using it from a bash terminal. You're using it from, I'm guessing, like Windows PowerShell.
Yeah.
So like all these commands that we're typing, like, you know, lspwd, these are not Windows commands. These are specifically like Mac or Linux bash commands. So they're not going to work from Windows PowerShell. It seems like you've got Git installed there, so the Git commands will work there. But like touch, that's just a basic Unix command. That's not going to work for you there.
Okay.
So a lot of the other Windows people, they've got Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL is what I would recommend. But I think Git Bash is also pretty good too. That should maybe cover your bases.
Yeah, because it does work on Git Bash, yeah, like the touch.
Cool. What other questions do we have? No more questions. Okay.
How do you delete a repository?
So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I would just wanted to delete this test that I was doing while I was following along. I don't know how.
So do you mean like a local Git repository or on github.com?
It's on github.com, yeah.
Okay, so on github.com, I guess the menu is a little weird. It's in settings, which is not exactly where I would expect it to be. And then in general, all the way at the bottom, there's the danger zone. This is where you can do all the super permanent things, like deleting or archiving the repo.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions before we continue? All right.
Can you mention a little bit about how it would work having multiple people working on the same project in a repository in terms of the timing of commits or pulling and making sure that the project is kind of cohesive and on the same page when you have multiple hands on it at the same time? How does
Yeah, so
How does
that's
it figure
definitely a
that
big
out?
question that you're going to get to learn the hard way later on in this course.
Okay.
But I mean, a big part of it is just communicate with your teammates. Another part of it
Okay.
is to work on separate parts of the program. Like if two people are editing the same part of the same file, there's nothing Git can do to make sense of that.
Oh, good. It has no superpowers. All right. Just checking.
So like ideally you are like dividing and conquering in some intelligent way where you're working on different files or at least different parts of the same file. So it's not so easy for Git to get confused. There will definitely be some times when two people will edit the same file and then one of you tries to pull and then Git is not going to know which version to give you. And so it's going to tell you like, I don't know what's going on. You need to fix this. That's called a merge conflict. It's probably like one of your least favorite things to happen with Git, but you're going to have to learn to deal with it. So have fun with that. Look forward to it.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep. What other questions do we have? Any more? Terrence, what's up?
So you just said if two or multiple people are working on the same file, if one of them was to go ahead and commit to GitHub, and then the next person also commits, won't it just overwrite the previous person's file?
Not necessarily. So let me see. So like if person A is doing work locally on their machine and they push their changes up to GitHub, and then person B is doing work locally on their machine and they push that up to GitHub, GitHub will reject the push from person B. They'll say that you can't update GitHub because we have changes that you don't have. You're not up to date. So since person A got in there first, person B's changes are going to get rejected and they're going to have to first pull in the changes from person A and then incorporate that into their local version and then fix that up, make it make sense again. And then they can push their changes up.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Great question. Any more questions before we move on to the final part of this demo?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Let's hear it.
So when I initialize and then do git status, I got a bunch of folders that say permission denied. Is that something in my setup that I did wrong?
Where did you create a Git repository?
.bash inside the bash file. I'm not sure.
Can you run PWD wherever you're at?
Let me see.
You're muted, Caleb.
Yeah, I can run PWD looks like it's running off my C drive instead of my Linux.
Yeah, so.
Okay, I'll have to figure that out.
I mean, so long story short, wherever you run Git and Git, that location right there, whatever folder you're in, that is the root of a new Git repository. And so if you run that in an existing folder that already has a bunch of stuff in it, then Git is already going to be looking at those files and trying to make sense of them, telling you like, hey, these are untracked. You should consider staging them and committing them. So we saw that today. I initialized the Git repository in my day one folder. There are already 3 files in there, and that wasn't really a problem. But if I went to like cd/, where I've got, my entire system is here, and then I initialized a Git repository here, that would be problems for me, because then Git would be trying to track every single file on my computer in this repository. And I would get a whole bunch of permissions errors as it's like looking into, hidden system folders that it shouldn't have access to. So you definitely want to make sure that when you initialize a Git repository, it's ideally an empty folder, or it's, where you're doing it and it only has the project specific files in it. Great question though. What
How
other
does it work if you rename your file on your computer? So let's say you rename, how does it work if you rename the file? So like, let's say we changed the name from code or whatever, the name of the folder to like code Platoon. How would that work with the communication to GitHub?
So you're talking about the folder that's containing our project?
Right.
So that doesn't matter at all.
Okay.
Right here, I can do day 1 to I just renamed demo folder today. It is still a Git repository. Git doesn't see any changes because Git does not care what the name of the folder is.
What about the file? If we change the file name, how does that work?
So if I change any of the files inside of it here, so that does matter. The files inside of the folder that is information that gets tracked. So if I want to mb main.js to world.js, so that's something. So here, it doesn't actually say it got renamed, but it's kind of the same thing in the end. It says we deleted one file and then created a new file. Incidentally, these 2 files have the same content. And now I can git add dot commit -m name stuff git push version.
So we just treat it like any other change that we made to the file and commit it.
Correct.
Okay.
Can you touch on GitHub locally hosting your sites and everything?
I can touch on it. So that's kind of like unrelated to what we'll be mostly using GitHub for. I guess GitHub is just a big, cool website owned by a really big company. Microsoft bought them. I don't know if you all know that. So GitHub does a lot of cool things. And one of the things that GitHub does is they let you host really simple front-end web pages. It's called GitHub Pages. So if you have a website that like doesn't need a server or anything, it's just like an informational poster or like a brochure, basically, you can host that on GitHub Pages. I'm not going to be covering it in this course because A, it's not really a professional skill. Like nobody cares if you know how to use GitHub Pages. And also, by the time you're done with this course, it'll be really easy for you to figure it out on yourself because you'll have done much harder things.
Awesome, thanks.
We got 2 hands up.
And just to be clear, so I'm not confused in the future. So everything we're doing for this, for the commands and everything, is not specific in any way to the Microsoft Visual Studio or anything. It'd be anything, any IDE that we use or whatever, and the command line would be the exact same, or just the normal command line for the same operating system for all these commands?
Correct. Nothing that I'm showing you is specific to Visual Studio Code. So in general, I will probably show you almost nothing in this class that is specific to Visual Studio Code. So throughout my career, I've used like a dozen or so different text editors, and I'm just kind of like sick of learning and forgetting new ones all the time. So like I mentioned before, I really like Vim, and I just actually use Vim within VS Code instead of like learning the specifics of VS Code itself. But I guess the moral of the story is that text editors come and go, so I don't like to get too attached to them. Whereas command line Git, like this is a skill that has been pretty much unchanged for like the past 3 or 4 decades. I don't know. No, wait, Git's from the early 90s. So yeah, this is like 3 decades, basically. And I don't think Git is going to get replaced anytime soon. So all these command line Git skills, like you will likely never forget this or never need to forget this or relearn it for the rest of your career. Whereas like all the specifics about the text editors you learn, like there's going to be a newer and shinier one that comes out at some point, and you're going to forget everything you learned about VS Code. You're going to learn that new one. I've done that like 6 times in my career. So yeah, none of it is specific to VS Code. It's just a convenience that they give you this terminal here, so you don't have to leave VS Code if you don't want to, but it is the exact same terminal that I have here. Just with
Okay, yeah, I was gonna ask if I could do this all in just the normal terminal, if it would make any difference or anything like that. So it'd be the same.
Yeah, you can, everything I'm doing in the VS Code terminal, you can do it in the normal terminal. And in fact, that is what I do when I'm not teaching, because that's my preference. I just think it's harder for you all to see it when I'm doing it like that. And in fact, I actually really like using Vim at the command line because I'm a huge nerd, but I would not encourage any of you to do that.
That's good. Thank you.
We had another hand up.
Yeah, so do companies use GitHub as a repository for their code?
Yeah, GitHub is the most popular online Git repository hosting website. There are others. So there's like GitLab, there's Bitbucket, which are similar websites. They're just less popular.
So Microsoft bought GitHub. So GitHub has servers somewhere with code for tons of companies. How do they keep it secure? How do you know your code is safe on a public repository, so to speak?
That's a good question.
I guess it's, I just have to have faith that it'll be fine because everyone else is doing it, but it sounds like a really big single point of failure, so to speak.
I mean, it is. And there have been like a couple, I'll say, incidents in the past, GitHub like security issues where they'll say like everybody like update all your passwords or whatever, or just I'm trying to think of a more concrete example. But there have been like breaches in GitHub where people get a notification, say like, hey, there's a breach, make sure there's nothing like too sensitive you have up, or just consider it compromised or whatever.
Interesting.
There are times when GitHub goes down, just like any website goes down, but sometimes GitHub goes down and then the entire software industry just takes a day off, basically. So yeah, it definitely is a single point of failure, but in theory, it's a very big company. They have a lot of really smart people getting paid a lot of money to make sure that it's available as often as possible.
Interesting.
So they probably have multiple copies of GitHub running simultaneously. So like if one of them goes down, you get automatically redirected to another one, stuff like that.
Sure. All right. Yeah, just curious. Thanks.
I heard they actually have a steel vault where they keep it in the Arctic Circle. I'm not joking.
That I haven't heard that before,
Like they have
but
a
it doesn't
backup.
surprise me.
Okay.
Something that is kind of weird about technology, something that's like hard for people to come to terms with, I think, is that the practices that lots of the really big tech companies do are often like really bizarre and not necessarily something that we would want to emulate. like people always, when they're starting out as programmers, they're looking to, what Google and Amazon, these like really big tech giants are doing and say like, I should be like those guys because they know what they're doing. But the truth is that when you're such an absurdly large company, you're going to have unique problems and you're going to come up with unique solutions. So like, I wouldn't tell you to do any programming practice just because some large tech company is doing it, because they probably have very unusual constraints that don't apply to most companies. So the kinds of things that I'm going to teach you will help you get by at smaller, medium-sized companies, which is honestly most businesses, I think, but definitely at the FANG level companies, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, they're going to do things a little bit differently probably, including Arctic storage and whatnot. Do we have any other questions? Okay. So let me actually get my editor real quick. So there's one last thing that I need to show you, because while it is really important to know how to create a Git repository from scratch, you're going to be doing that when you are working on your personal projects and such. To start out, you're actually going to be copying the exercises that we've got from Code Platoon, and you're going to copy them into your own GitHub account. So I'm going to show you now a slightly different flow that you're going to use for getting started on the exercises. So let's see here. Okay, we are in Romeo Platoon. So let's say I want to know what the homework is for today. So I'm going to go into the curriculum. Week 1, we are in week 1, day 1. This is what we had planned for today. We'll check out this document. At the end of every day's lecture notes, you're going to see this assignments section. Please do your best to do all of them. Generally from top to bottom is the recommended order. But if you're not sure, you want to do them in a different order, just ask, or do whatever you want. I'm like, but so the first one we're going to start with is 99 bottles. So that's on top. So I'm going to click on this assignment. This takes us to Romeo Platoon / algo 99 bottles. So let's pay attention now to which organization we're in. We're in the Romeo Platoon organization. But so all of these repos in Romeo Platoon, they're like private, they're owned by Romeo, and you folks don't have permission to change them. These are our exercises. You can't just like change the description of them or whatever. So what you're going to do first is you're going to copy our exercise from the Romeo GitHub organization into your own personal GitHub account. Okay, so the way that we copy hang on a second, actually. You're supposed to be able to fork it.
Isn't it under the main repo? Oh, I love forking, never mind.
Doesn't seem like that. So we appear to be having some minor technical difficulties, but don't worry. There's a solution, there's an alternative. So what I was going to tell you is that you want to copy the project from Romeo Platoon to your own personal GitHub account. And traditionally, the way you do that is with forking. A fork in GitHub copies a repository from one GitHub account to another GitHub account. So just to be clear, forking copies a repo from one GitHub account to another GitHub account. So forking only exists on this website. Just the concept of forking, it's only something you can do on github.com. That is not something that we can do locally. It's just not a concept that that exists in command line Git. And then after you fork it into your personal GitHub account, you can clone the repo. So after forking it into your account, you can clone it, which copies it to your local machine. And then cloning copies a repo from github.com to your local computer. So these are two concepts, forking and cloning, that people get confused because they're kind of similar. So it just depends on where you're copying things to and from. And then after you clone it, you're good to go, you're ready to work. The remote repository is already set up for you at that point because GitHub knows where you just copied it from. So it assumes that you want to push it back up there. But like we just said, forking does not seem to be enabled at the moment. So we're going to have to figure out a different workflow for this. So here's how we're gonna actually do it. Here's how we're gonna get started today. I'm on Romeo Platoon, Algo 99 bottles. I'm going to copy this Git repository, copy that URL for it. I'm gonna go to my terminal. Go into exercises. Actually, I'm just going to do it right here because my exercises folder already has a repo with that name. But whatever folder you're going to store all of your exercises in, maybe a folder called code or projects, code platoon or whatever, you're going to git clone and then the repo URL. Now I ls and it shows me I've got this folder here, Algo 99 bottles, C into that. So this is the starter code that you just saw on GitHub. There's the README explaining what is being asked of you in this problem. And then basically two blank files, one for the Python version, one for the JavaScript version. Today, I believe you were being asked to do this in Python, and we're going to return to this exercise later to do it in JavaScript. So that's why there's two blank files in here, but for tonight, you're just worrying about the Python version. But so there's a problem here that since I just cloned this from the Romeo Platoon organization, this is currently connected to Romeo Platoon. So if I do git remote -v, this shows me that this remote is already set up. I didn't have to create this link because I cloned it from this URL. GitHub is assuming that that's where I want to push it back up to. Normally, that's a smart assumption, but this time it's not correct. I'm going to want to push this up to my own repository on my GitHub account. So what do I do if I want to make this no longer a Git repository? So I could reinitialize it as a fresh one.
-rm-r.git.
So I'm going to remove the .git folder. Oh, now it's asking me for permissions. So I can say yes, and then it's going to ask me yes. Oh, there's actually only 2 objects there. But so if I did -rf, it would not have asked me for permissions, for confirmation to delete those. Anyways, so I have deleted the Git folder, the .git folder. Now I do git remote -v. Git doesn't know what I'm talking about. This is not a Git repository. So I'm going to reinitialize it. Git init, add dot. I just started, don't really have anything interesting to say at this point. Now I'm going to go to my GitHub. I'm going to create a new repository. And I'm going to make sure that I create this repository under my account, my organization, not the Romeo Platoon organization. You guys won't actually even have permission to do that, so that's not a problem you're going to have. But I have too many organizations, so I always have to make sure I don't do things in the wrong organization. We call this algo 99 bottles. Looks like I've done this demo before. So I made a repo, algo 99 bottles again. And so now this URL I'm going to use as the new URL for this repo. So I'm going to copy that, run git remote add. Push origin master. And so now I have effectively forked the repo. It's a little bit more manual. We're gonna try to figure out why that button's not working. But yeah, so now I'm ready to work. I've got my own copy of this project in my GitHub account. So if I want to do more work on this, here's my 99bottles.py file. So I'll print I made changes. And just like I showed you before, Git's going to show me I've got unstaged changes. Git add dot. Git commit -n. Statement. Origin master. And then after pushing it, we can see that it's been updated on github.com. And so that's the general flow of how you do the exercises. You don't need to like submit anything because like I said before, we're not grading all of the exercises. Just do your best to get as far as you can through as many of them as you can. Reach out for help as you get stuck. And that's about all I've got to tell you about Git for today. I really just wanted to give you the minimum so you could, get working. I saw a few hands up. Who's got some questions?
I know that I'm probably going to want to rewatch the video for how to clone it, and then change the where we're pushing it and all of that. So where and when are you going to post the recording of this?
I'll try to do that as soon as possible, hopefully before 5. Sometimes it takes Zoom a little while to process the videos, so I get to like watch bars fill for an hour or so. But ideally, like you should get it in time to continue working on the exercises tonight after having been able to review the video.
And that will just be in the Romeo Slack channel, or?
So we have a YouTube account. There are going to be a bunch of YouTube playlists. So it'll be pretty well organized. You'll be able to, find the latest date or go back to any specific day you wanted. But today I'll have to post the link to our YouTube account just so you can find it for the first time.
Okay.
What other questions do we have?
So if I go onto the GitHub account, it says 99 bottles in JavaScript. Where were you referencing that it says in Python? Just for my knowledge.
Hang on just a second. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the curriculum here real quick.
No worries.
Oh, so I might have misspoken. So for today, please do the challenges in JavaScript. We'll come back to these challenges from today and do them in Python later.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Did you just say you wanted us to do it in JavaScript first?
Yeah, in
today?
JavaScript first. I'm just looking ahead now. And then on Wednesday, you're going to be assigned many of the same exercises to be done in Python. So you're going to get real familiar with some of these day one exercises. All right, what other questions do we have? Any more last minute questions before we?
I got one question,
Yeah.
Rafael.
What do you got?
I'm still a little unclear on the difference between like cloning and forking.
Yep. Definitely easy to get those kind of mixed up. So the simplest way I can think about it is forking is something that only exists on github.com, and that copies a repository from one GitHub account to another GitHub account. Has nothing to do with your local machine. So what I wanted to do was copy the repo from the Romeo Platoon organization into my personal GitHub account. So that's the end goal here, for us to get the repos from Romeo's organization to our personal GitHub account. So it looks like forking is not enabled for this repo for some reason. I'll have to investigate that. So as the workaround, we are cloning the repo from Romeo Platoon's organization to our local machine. But then when you do that, it's automatically has the connection between your local machine and Romeo Platoon's GitHub account, which is not what you want, because you want it connected to your own GitHub account. So that's why we deleted the .git folder and then reinitialized the repository and pushed it to our own account. Sorry?
If I understand it, it's like they're pretty similar, but cloning, if we want to like have the same functions as like forking on GitHub, there's a few more steps we have to do. Is that right or no?
I mean, I'd say that you're supposed to be able to fork on GitHub. It's disabled for some reason. We're just kind of working around it, doing a couple extra steps to recreate the same thing.
So it sounds like forking makes a copy on your GitHub account, and then cloning then creates a local copy of that on your personal computer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you, guys.
Yep.
So I know I'm gonna have to go back and look at this video to see how you did how you pulled it in and then cloned it. Are you gonna post a message in Slack once it's been uploaded?
Yeah, I'll post the link to our YouTube channel, where you can see all the videos, all the recordings of the lectures, but also the code itself that I've written today. It's not much, it's mostly just these notes, but all of the code that I write in front of you during these lectures, you can expect this to also be posted up to GitHub. I have a special demos and notes repo that I'll share with you later this afternoon. All right, do we have any other questions?
Just one quick one. So when it comes to GitHub, so I have a desktop folder right now called Code Platoon, and then I also put like just homework in there so I could save all of the homeworks into that file. Now, if I was doing that through the terminal, if I git init in the homeworks assignment, is that not going to include the Code Platoon file because I'm already in a different directory that's like a child object essentially? Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So right now I have a directory or folder called Code Platoon. Inside of there, I have another folder that's just called homework, and I plan on putting like all the assignments in there. But if I were to accidentally do git init inside of like say the 99 bottles folder itself, not actually the homework, is that not going to include the homework? Is that just going to do the 99 bottles? If that makes sense?
Right, that would just include the 99 bottles, but that is what you want. You want to have one Git repository for each project.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we assign like 3 or 4 exercises a day. Later on, it's going to be fewer, larger assignments, but still, by the end of this program, you will have dozens of very small Git repositories in your GitHub account.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. What other questions do we have?
Are we allowed to help others with their
You are
problems?
encouraged to help others.
Okay. Last question. Are we doing all the assignments there or just the 99 bottles for now?
Yeah, do everything that you see on the curriculum for today.
Okay.
So it's, where are we?
And each one to be their own individual repo, just like they are on Romeo.
Right. It's not actually that bad though. So 99 bottles and def grammar are traditional assignments. Terminal commands in depth, you can just kind of read through this. It's going to be sort of a review of what I showed you this morning. And then this incoming student survey is something very important that you do need to do, but it's a survey. This is not like a homework assignment. So yeah, it shouldn't be too bad for tonight. What other questions do we have?
So I have a quick question about, not to do with that specifically, but it is to do with the, you had mentioned some file extensions that you recommended we get for VS Code. One of them was the bracket pair colorizer. When I installed that, it says that it's no longer being maintained. And so it asks if I want to migrate to native colorization. Is that what I should do or just ignore it? Because it pops up every time I open my VS Code. And I'm sure everybody else is having the same thing.
I mean, if it's bothering you, you might want to try following the suggestion and updating to that other version, see if that works just as well without the nuisance.
Oh, is that what that is? Native colorization is a different one.
Or I'm sorry, the way you said it sounded like there was a different package that they were recommending you use, but you're saying that it's recommended you use just like the built-in colors.
Well, I don't know which one it is.
Okay, so I don't use very many extensions at all, so I'm not exactly sure what it's asking you to do or what the problem was. So I would say that, you know, you're probably fine without it. But if you want, I can take a look at it sometime and see, you know, what it's suggesting or what might be it.
Oh, I just didn't know if you guys would already know which one to tell us to do. So not an issue. I can figure it out.
Cool. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a recommendation for you at this time. Do we have any more questions? A lot of good ones. All right, I guess that was actually all the questions. Oh, not quite. Dennis?
I actually have a question about install vest. So I did it this weekend and it seemed fine. And then today I went to type in Brew Doctor, I believe, and then it came back with a bunch of errors, like a bunch of stuff that was wrong.
You
have to do with Node.
One of them was Node, one was Python. I figured out the Python one. I had to delete the folder, and then the Node one still gave me problems.
A little bit hard for me to debug it from here. Why don't you try posting the remaining error messages you have in the questions channel, and we'll see what we can do after this lecture.
Will do. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have any last questions before we break for the afternoon? Alrighty.